Welcome to the VR Creator Podcast. I'm joined with Jack today. So, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell everybody how'd you get here?
I'm Jack. I am, I suppose, a developer in my kind of spare time, and in my day-to-day job, I'm an immersive creative technologist. What that is kind of a little bit of development, a little bit of 360 video, VR, that kind of whole world, and augmented reality as well. I kind of span a lot of stuff in my day-to-day, and then over the last few years, I've kind of learned Unity and started developing from there. And along with the stuff that I do day to day and the kind of weekends and evenings, I'm learning more VR development and participated in the last two VR game jams as well.
Nice. What did you make for the last, not this like most recent one, but the one before that?
I made a piece called Three Pilgrims of Pizza.
Oh,
What is
interesting.
it? No, Three Pillars of Pizza. And it was a little kind of fun game where there was a conveyor belt of pizzas coming across, and you had to, the kind of little tripod that goes in the middle of the pizza. You had to
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
put that down and try and hit the center of the pizza. It was quite a kind of a fun, and that was like my first game jam, and actually making a kind of full game end to end for something like this. I kind of put that together, and there's like a little bit of narrative as well, and then the kind of fun bit as well of the kind of the actual game itself, and the kind of gamification and like score based system. That was quite fun to put together, and I actually had some statistics come through afterwards, and kind of seeing how well people did was kind of quite fun.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So, you added in some data in there. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah,
And then
because
most recently, you created the game that came in second overall, which was pretty wild in this most recent game
yeah,
jam.
absolutely, yeah. That was I wasn't expecting that at all. Um, I would have I was aiming to do well, of course. I'm sure as a lot of people are, but yeah, to come kind of second is just amazing. Really, I was blown away with the response from the community and things.
Very
It's really
nice.
nice.
So what did you end up building for the people who don't know the rankings?
I created a kind of a VR interactive narrative called Fragments. It tells a story where you embody a character called Alex, and she's going through some kind of loss, and that you kind of come into at the beginning of the game. She's kind of quite under the weather, like depressed, effectively, and is kind of reflecting on some of the things in the room, and you're kind of prompted to carry on through her internal monologue. And then the doorbell goes, and a box arrives, the special delivery. And within that are a kind of few mementos from this kind of past life that you don't really know much about. And within it is a letter from Kay, who, as the story transpires, is the one that Alex is mourning. And each of the objects within the box kind of triggers a memory, triggers a bit of voiceover, a bit of narrative, and you go back and experience a few kind of small highlights from their relationship. And at the end, there's kind of a nice little coming together and finale, which I won't spoil for anyone who hasn't played it.
Yeah, it was really well put together, especially for a game jam. Like just being so simple as in like the mechanics, like nothing super complicated, but the storyline was so cohesive and so well put together that it was very impressive. And then you got first place in the presentation category too. So for
Yeah,
all of that, how did you come up with that idea?
I have no idea. So I knew I wanted to do a kind of an interactive narrative as opposed to um, a kind of traditional game or kind of score based experience. So I'm in London. So the Friday night when the game jam started, I kind of spent the evening kind of coming up with some ideas and toying around with just kind of loads of different things wherever my mind took me. And I guess late that Friday night, I kind of came up with the kind of bare bones structure of this piece, and then developed that over the weekend. Um, and yeah, continued writing the script and managed to kind of had a rough timeline in my head that I knew that first weekend, those first kind of few days were really critical to kind of get out the structure and make sure I'm happy, and set the expectations for myself and kind of where I want to hit. So yeah, I managed to write the narrative, and yeah, it was a lot more kind of emotional than maybe I had planned going into the into the jam. But then I finished that, drew a line under it, sent it off to a few kind of voiceover artists to play the two characters, and that was kind of just off in the background. And then I started kind of thinking about the development and getting into that side of things. But then I think the big kind of turning point for me was on the kind of Monday or Tuesday. I got back these voiceovers, these kind of like actual performances from real people taking my words and presenting them and reading the emotion, and it was just incredible, really, like to have written something and then like I've not done anything like that kind of before with that kind of emotion, and to have something back that matched that level and kind of took it further. I knew at that point that I just needed to carry on and kind of work my best to really put something good together that would kind of live up to the quality of acting that I got from those two voiceover artists. It was, yeah, amazing. I was kind of blown away at that point, so knew that I had to kind of continue to push on from that.
Yeah, that's super cool. I love the approach that you took. Like, so you didn't even really start building the game in like Unity or game engine for several days.
Yeah, like I suppose I started with like a template. So as I know you guys have got like a few templates out there, and I'd kind of merged together my own from kind of some previous projects, and had got this kind of starting point where obviously all the kind of VR interaction was there, and the base system. So I'd kind of done that before, so I had a starting point. So I knew I didn't need to go through and do all the settings and stuff. Um, but actually, yeah, in terms of kind of programming the logic and getting everything in, it wasn't really until a kind of Monday or Tuesday night that actually I kind of got into it. And the other big side of things is like the 3D side of stuff. So I'm not in any stretch of imagination a 3D artist. So everything that I had there is kind of sourced or kind of taken from online. I lent quite heavily on Turbo Squid. I'm sure other 3D repositories are there, but yeah, Turbo Squid was kind of where I was at getting those models and building out that world. And I spent a lot of time kind of downloading things, putting them into Blender, kind of positioning them out to get a bit of a plan. Because again, like that, the physical space is part of the narrative. It's not just what you see and hear or through the story. It's actually the environment that you're in, and you have to kind of really think about that. And having that setting as a base was really important, just as much as everything else. So yeah, a lot of time was spent on that side of things and getting that right.
Yeah, so yeah, you came at it from, so most of the people who submitted a game was more of that, try to get a high score or try to get a really fast time or doing whatever, the general game stuff.
Mm.
And so I think yours was one of, if not the only, like narrative heavy game, which really made it stand out in and of itself because you're not used to that kind of thing as you're going through all the different games. Like, oh, this is paced really well and has professional voiceovers
Hmm.
and all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, very, very well put together. And then not even being a visual artist or 3D artist or being so like an expert in mechanics or like honestly any of these like pieces, but you just were able to put them all together so nicely that it just worked out to be a really good, really solid, almost just like a short story that we you got to
Yeah,
experience.
yeah, and I think that's kind of where I was pitching at, and I think it almost actually it reflects in the rankings, because I think my lowest ranking there was I think it was the enjoyment level, which I'm sure if you're going through playing a kind of a competitive game, you have you get that feedback and that kind of enjoyment. Whereas I kind of knew after I'd written the script and when I was kind of going through the week that I probably wasn't going to rank that highly in that space, because it's not that kind of experience. I wanted to create something a bit more interesting and
Hmm.
narrative driven, and I think that's in itself is a really interesting kind of place of VR. Um, yeah, just that kind of whole world of storytelling beyond the interaction and the gamification. So I'm glad that I kind of had the opportunity to explore that in kind of quite a small space of time.
Yeah. And is that storytelling what you do for work now? What let's transition and talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
So yes and no. So I'm not. Um, I'm kind of a bit of an all rounder. So my background is editing and post production. So I kind of come from a film perspective. So I did a degree in that. So I spent 3 years kind of just doing traditional 16:9 editing, um, bit of narrative based, a bit of kind of corporate stuff, a whole kind of range. Um, and then started introducing 360-degree video and getting into the 360 world and doing the stitching and the editing and the compositing and things. So my skills in that sense are kind of really broad. And then that brought me on to the role that I'm in now. I was doing a lot of freelance 360 video work at the company, and then transitioned into development and kind of started expanding those skills even further um, through kind of 2020 when things were a little bit quiet. I kind of picked up Unity and started playing around with that. We had a few kind of small R&D projects at work that I could just figure out some stuff and try some things out. So having that kind of free time really helped me kind of jumpstart into that space. But yeah, day to day, I'm kind of doing anything from video, either production or post production, development, so Unity based stuff mainly. Um, yeah, all sorts. It's kind of
How
it's
did you
quite
find that job? Because it sounds like a good one that you can just kind of bounce around and do whatever interests you almost.
yeah. It's I kind of got into it freelancing with the video side of things. So um, yeah, the company that I work for is a kind of immersive agency, effectively. So quite small, but kind of dealing with all those kind of immersive side of things. So augmented reality, mixed reality, VR, like that kind of thing. So I kind of came at it from the 360 video and the VR point of view, and it just kind of expanded out from there. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just one of those kind of natural progressions where I've kind of found myself in the middle of this kind of melting pot of innovation and stuff, and it's kind of quite exciting to be jumping on whatever kind of comes up next.
Yeah, was that one of those just freelance gigs that turned into a full-time deal?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly that.
that's how we hire at my company. We always do freelancers for like a couple months, and if it works out, then we ask them to come on full time.
Yeah,
So that's generally, I think, the best approach, especially when you're learning something. Like, do a lot of these little small projects, and then you can start to build up your portfolio and whatnot, and then you ultimately get that full-time gig.
yeah, yeah. No, I'm very kind of thankful of it and that freedom and stuff that it offers me. It's really lovely as well.
Yeah. How did you find gigs when you were freelancing?
It was kind of challenging because like I was wanting to do more 360 video stuff, and whilst I was freelancing, I was kind of solely video based, so um, no development at that point. A lot of kind of trying to get corporate work in kind of 16:9 video. That's kind of mainly where I was at. I got a few 360 jobs. I kind of built up a GoPro rig. So with the old GoPro Hero 4s, you kind of get six of them together and make a kind of 360 rig out of that. So I'd built up one of those so I could do a few projects with that. Um, but yeah, it was kind of challenging to be able to do those kind of fun things between all of the traditional kind of 16:9 stuff. Um, yeah, it wasn't. Uh, yeah.
What's the push behind adding in Unity to the 360 video stuff?
So there's kind of how do you mean? Sorry. So like
Like, people are asking for like 360 videos and stuff, and then they're asking for more like animation type things and stories behind it, and almost like CGI added to the 360 videos. Like, how does the 360 video and like Unity and all of that
hmm.
mesh together?
So most of the stuff we do is just kind of presenting the 360 video as a kind of VR app. So someone would watch the videos back that way. But there's a few cases where we're kind of then taking stuff on and creating a bit more of a world or an environment with that. We did a project a few years ago. It was actually done in tilt brush, so kind of full VR workflow. So we had a tilt brush artist create this kind of spiral column um, to go with a piece of music and to go with the narrative that the director came with. And then with that, you can export a 360 video. So then that was a 360 video kind of going around this track that the artist had made, the kind of physical path. And then we then took that into Unity, took the video, took the kind of the concept of the world and created a portal. So you kind of, with augmented reality, place down this kind of doorway, and then you can walk through into this world that they'd created through Tilt Brush. So like that kind of thing is quite interesting, where you're kind of blending different kind of virtual aspects together, but still using a kind of 360 video kind of foundation fundamental to that.
Hmm. Yeah, I actually started in 360 videos, kind of how I got into VR too, because I was
Nice.
in kind of in the film world, did photography and video and that kind of stuff, and I was like, oh, this is a 360 camera, that's pretty fun. And then got one of those like slide headsets so you can look around at 360 videos in properly, and then that just kind of turned into like, okay, now how do I make my own stuff? And then
Yeah.
Unity progressed.
Yeah,
But
exactly. It's, I think one of the areas I'd like to do more of it is that kind of VFX side of things, so taking a kind of a shot plate and being able to add stuff onto it. Um, that's something I've not done a lot of. Would be really interesting to kind of begin to build that out. But yeah, it's all a kind of a blend, right? Um, we did a project as well a couple of years ago. It was, so kind of bit of backstory. It was a project for a festival that was touring around the UK, and there were loads of different companies that were kind of part of it. And we the brief was to kind of take archive footage from the BBC and a few other kind of archive sources, the BFI as well, British Film Institute, um, and create a VR experience from that, which in itself was a really interesting challenge, taking this kind of traditional 16:9 or 4:3 or film footage and making something virtual reality with it. Like, how do we do that? How do you take that stuff without doctoring it or kind of um, changing it too heavily, because there's kind of rights and stuff that are with it, and without just like kind of slapping it on a wall as like a projection screen or something in a VR space. And we created a project about the kind of punk movement in the UK, and with that there was we kind of blended 360 video and VR. So we started in a kind of present day 360 video of this kind of young girl's bedroom, where she'd discovered the diary of her parents being kind of punks and rebellious, as she herself in present day was being a bit rebellious. So there was kind of the reality of this 360 environment. And then we go back into the diary as she's kind of reading through and discovering stuff, and listening to kind of her mum's stories as a child through the diary, and kind of how she was rebelling and things like that. And then it ends back in the real world in 360 video, in this bedroom, where the parents kind of come in and are initially shocked that she's found the diary, but then actually are really into it because they're all this kind of rebellious punk sorts, which is kind of an interesting blend in itself between the 360 video and the virtual reality, but also trying to weave in archive footage into those virtual environments and kind of talk about some of the movements at the time, having clips of kind of young punks who are trying to rebel, and yeah, that kind of thing is really interesting to put together as well.
that's super cool. I feel like that's one of the things that VR is kind of missing right now is just the storytelling games. Like a lot of it is just very like shooters or, Call of
Mm,
Duty type or Battle Royale type games that, are fun to play and that kind of stuff, but I feel like there's only like a couple of really good storytelling games that you can actually play and go through, and
yeah.
that yeah, that's a really interesting thing I'd like to see more of in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's definitely a space for it, and I suppose looking ahead to the Apple Vision Pro and things like that, that probably are going to be slightly less game orientated, unlike what Meta's doing with their headsets. So I'm sure there's definitely a space there for more storytelling. Um, but equally on the meta, on the quest and stuff, as you have people on the platform, if you start to introduce narrative elements into that, like maybe they'll stop and have a look as well. I agree. There's definitely kind of a gap in the market for that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The Quest or the Vision Pro coming out isn't going to have, interaction nearly as much as all the current games because there's no controllers.
Mm,
So you'll have to figure out how to do games and stuff without being able to really move, to be honest,
yeah,
because the thumbstick and teleportation movement require a controller, and so people are going to have to get a little creative with that, and it'll probably kind of emerge as a lot more storytelling games,
absolutely.
like
Yeah.
that. Super cool. So what's the future hold for you? Like what ideally in an ideal world, like what would you want to do or pursue?
I don't know. Like I'm quite content at the moment with the kind of breadth of stuff that I'm doing. Um, I suppose outside of work, I definitely want to do kind of more VR game development, and fragments is something that I kind of feel like I've only touched the surface of. I think there's so much story there to be told. Um, so I've already started reworking the script and trying to kind of push on with that and make something a bit bigger. As for where that ends up, I don't really know. It's still kind of just a passion project and something I'd like to pursue. I think, yeah, I still love the blend of video, and I don't think I'll ever kind of stop wanting to have that kind of linear narrative creation stuff gone. So how I can blend that into the interactive stuff, I think, will be really interesting. And I like this idea of your actions have consequences in VR. So if I'm able to create things like that, even kind of subtly, like I think that's a really interesting space where you can tell a story, but let the user find their own way through that and experience it maybe slightly differently.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Let's see, do you have any advice for anyone who's looking to get into the VR space? Anything you would recommend?
Yeah, I think trying lots of experiences and seeing what things you like, what things work for you, what things don't work for you, I think is a really good way to start. If you're able to pick that kind of thing up and be able to pull that apart and really kind of reflect on that, I think it's really important. So like there's pieces that I've seen and experienced myself that I've either really enjoyed or not, and trying to work out exactly why that is, and being able to shape your opinions based on that. But then from kind of a technical point of view, most of the way that I've learned my development is having this thought of, okay, I want to do X or Y, and then having to go in and find out exactly how that works and how to do that specific thing. So you kind of, yeah, I jump so much around different kind of problems. It's all about problem solving, right? It's all about debugging. You kind of write a lovely bit of code and then it doesn't work and you need to figure out why. So I think it's just that mindset, having that right mindset to be able to figure out what your problem is before you even kind of get there, and then learn about that and then be able to implement it and then debug it. I think it's not a kind of specific thing to do, but that kind of mindset I think is really important to get into development and to kind of push forward in creating exciting pieces. And that also goes from coding all the way through to kind of the visual side of things. So be that 3D or texturing or lighting and any of that kind of stuff. If you have a kind of a thought of where you want to get to and learn how to actually get to that point, I think that's the best way to get there.
Yeah, I find a lot of people will fall into the trap of they'll get super excited and super into learning, and then they'll start looking at tutorials, and then they just get caught up in the wave of tutorials, and then they're just following tutorial after tutorial, and they've totally forgotten the initial problem that they had or what they
Mm-hmm.
were trying to build, and so like you're even proof that you don't need to learn tons of complicated stuff in order to build something really meaningful and impactful and just a really solid piece. It's just finding out how to do that next problem that you're running into and
Yeah,
then solving that and then going to the next one and then
yeah,
trying out a bunch of stuff that interest you, because I feel like as long as you keep pursuing the stuff that is interesting to you and keeps you engaged and motivated, is like you'll continue to progress and learn in the space. Whereas like you get trapped just learning, like watching video after video after video, and it just gets boring and you burn out eventually.
Yeah, exactly. And I've got so many kind of small projects on my computer that I've started. So it's like, oh, this would be a great idea. I kind of go in, do a few things, get bored of it. But in doing that, you kind of pick up a few little bits here and there, and you pick up, okay, this project I focused on the lighting, and oh, that's really cool. Or this project I focused on the interactions. That's really cool. And then eventually all these things start to play together, and you know what you've learned, and you know where your kind of gaps in your knowledge are. So then when you come to actually apply that in something like a VR jam, it's like that's really cool because you now have a week to actually produce something. Typically, you don't have a deadline, so things just go on for forever, right? So being able to focus yourself and see and have a goal that you must hit at the end of that time, and be able to take all those tiny little bits of knowledge that you've learned through just kind of playing or experimenting with various different projects and put that together. That's great. That's also really rewarding doing it that way. So
Yeah, game jams definitely reveal to you what you need to learn and work on.
yeah, that's also
They
true.
have a way of doing that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And of course, like it's always the conversation around a jam of like you're setting yourself the expectations and you want to make this amazing thing, but then actually you need to kind of drop it back to realistic points of view. And I think that's also a really good way of reviewing yourself of what you know and what you don't know. If you write yourself a script or an idea or a plot for a game, and there's some things you don't know, and you're like, okay, well, my goal out of this is to go in and learn these few things, and then you find the gaps in your knowledge and try and fill them either quickly or then you reflect on that afterwards. I think from my point of view in this latest jam, one of the things I wanted to get right is that kind of visual aesthetic, which obviously has been recognized, but that's something I was kind of quite aware of through it, and allowing myself to have enough time to actually focus on that, to get the lighting right, to make sure the models were in the right place, the texturing was good. So kind of setting those goals, and if you're able to recognize where those kind of gaps in your knowledge are and be able to focus on that is really good as well. And looking back to the previous years when I did the pizza experience, I hadn't done that kind of gamification thing before where you're counting scores and that kind of stuff. So I knew that was the thing that I wanted to focus on. That was the thing I wanted to come away learning. And because you have a week, because you have a deadline, you kind of have to get on with it, and you can't procrastinate or get distracted by a million other tutorials or different aspects of the game.
Yeah. Did you ever think about bringing in like a partner or someone to fill in some of those gaps, or was it always just kind of because like you outsource the voiceover kind of work,
Yeah.
which is like, and a lot of people think like, oh, I need a partner to work on this whole game with me the whole way through. But you kind of took the approach of like, okay, we'll just send that little piece off and like
Hmm.
have some but friends or buddies, record that, and then I'm still gonna like still have all the responsibility for building out the game. I just like can facilitate a few people helping out.
Yeah, I think like a few things like that I've kind of outsourced and got support on, but the actual kind of the whole bringing together of the experience I wanted to do myself. On one hand, because I didn't know how much time I could commit and how much I could kind of focus my attention on it, so I didn't want to commit to someone else's time to bring that in. But also, I kind of saw that as the challenge, right? It's that I wanted to learn these specific things. I wanted to be able to understand what stuff I didn't know, or where I need to focus on in the future. So by being across the whole thing, like obviously it's really hard work, and there was definitely a few late nights out of hours. So like that was challenging, but it's also really rewarding to be able to kind of do it all yourself and be able to feel that and kind of make your way through it as well.
Yeah, then you have that portfolio piece that's like I made 95% of this project, and did all the scripting and editing and all that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And like in terms of kind of team working, I do some of that at work, and some of the projects we work on is kind of collaborative. Or most of them are collaborative, but in terms of actually kind of coding and making um, the final piece. Like there's a few that are collaborative in that way, but um, like working with another um, creator or something who you don't really know very well, like in terms of kind of going out into the community and finding someone to collaborate with, that's kind of, I don't know, I was a little bit daunted by that really, as you kind of, you need to have a rapport, I think, but I don't know, maybe some people are fine without that, but for me, I kind of like to know what page I'm on.
Yeah, it's I feel like it's a very hit or miss kind of thing. A lot of people do really well networking for game jams, and they find really amazing partners. And some people even go on and make studios out of
Hmm.
whatever project they made for their game jam with the people that they were working with. But then also there's just like you don't know what you're gonna get, and if you just sign on with this random project, it could just be disastrous and you waste a whole week or however long. But yeah, that's I highly recommend game jams in general, whether you do it alone or with people, just because it's a huge learning experience, and reveal a lot of the gaps of your knowledge too. So,
Yeah,
oh
exactly.
yeah,
Even if you commit to it and don't end up submitting something, there's still value in going through that process and having a solid goal and a solid kind of brief to go away and do something creative with. Um, I think I saw a few people that haven't submitted or didn't submit on time or kind of just couldn't because of whatever reason. But I'm sure the process that those people went through is still just as valuable as if they had submitted. It's getting into that mindset, thinking about how the project will work and what you can learn and need to learn from it.
have you done any other game jams besides the VR ones?
No, just the two VR ones that you guys have put on.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I've not done any non VR games as well. So
Yeah, I was
all of
just
my
curious to
Unity
see
are.
if you were like your goal is to try to do was X amount of game jams a year or something like that.
No, I was. I had this year's game jam in my calendar for some time, so I kind of marked out the time I knew to kind of keep my social activities to a minimum that week as well. Uh,
Yeah, it's you can't really do too many of those a year because it's just like life stops for a week and that's all you work on.
yeah, exactly. And like with that, I wanted to put my all into it as well. So, um, yeah, you kind of need to set across the time. But it's yeah, I don't know. I think like I haven't done any non VR stuff before, so it's kind of a whole new way of thinking for me of kind of putting something that isn't VR together. Um, I don't know how that would transition. I'm sure some people do transition that, and I'd imagine quite a lot of people are coming from that traditional games into VR and trying to figure out that transition more so than the opposite way. Yeah, it's quite interesting. I don't know. I don't have much experience on that.
Yeah. What do you think is the hardest part about VR?
I think guiding someone through an experience or a game and not knowing exactly what they're going to do. It's kind of the same in 360 video that you create this whole environment, this whole kind of sphere of content of narrative. Um, but you have to employ kind of small tricks to get people in the direction you want, which I think is the most challenging thing to A, get your head around, and then B, to implement, to actually tell a story in the way that you want to tell a story whilst giving people freedom to walk over the other side of the room or to look off in another direction. I think is so challenging. So being able to figure out some of those cues, like audio cues, for example. And if you have a cue over here and someone hears that in spatial audio, the chances are they will look in that direction or at least be intrigued by that or know something's going on there. But then visual cues as well, having someone walk across screen from a kind of video point of view, if you want to track someone's eye or attention, you want to kind of have a kind of visual flag post to follow. And if you go if you go from content on your kind of right and then behind you in the next scene, you kind of disorientate your viewer. So there's kind of those small little guidances that you need to make sure are in there. And I think the same goes when you're in a 3D environment and you can kind of look and interact with whatever you want. So I think then the challenge is making that also feel natural. So one of the things that I had in Fragments was each of the elements that you pick up out of the box, you kind of hear a bit of voiceover being spoken about, and then they snap down on the table. And I had some feedback saying that kind of felt unnatural because people weren't expecting that. But this was kind of the process I was going through. Is that's when I wanted your attention to change. This was no longer kind of relevant. You'd kind of picked up on that object already. I didn't want people interacting with that again, so you kind of lock it so they can't. But then obviously people have interacted with it, so they're expecting to interact with it. So it's a really difficult balance to be able to find that medium of um, being able to actually kind of engage people the whole time and give them freedom whilst also keeping them on the path that you want them to go down.
Yeah, you got to give them a little bit of hand holding. That's a good point. Like just the onboarding process of there's such a wide range of like experience levels of people who have played VR, and
Mm-hmm.
so even down to thinking about like how's someone going to move around the space or if they're even going to move around the space, because people who haven't experienced VR before when they put a VR headset on, they just look straight,
Yeah,
like they don't look around, they don't move around, they just stare straight ahead, and you kind of have to, encourage that movement to look around and then to move around, and how to actually reach out and grab objects, and like, even down to, are they, what buttons are they going to press, are they even
yeah.
holding the controller correctly,
Yeah,
that kind
exactly.
of
Well,
stuff.
most of the time they're not, and like, I've had a lot of experience of showing people videos in VR headsets, and you give them the controller so they can press play, and they're holding it upside down or backwards, and you like press this button, they're just like mashing all their fingers on whatever button they can find. But with the punk project I was talking about earlier, we had a really unique opportunity to do some in-person user testing. So the project was going to go, or did go out to libraries across the UK. So anyone from any age range, any background could potentially be experiencing this. And the majority of people probably don't have a high level of understanding of VR. So in that user testing, we had people, the kind of target audience, come in and just try an early build of our project, and learned so much from that. Of There was one person who was really kind of really up to speed with VR, knew how it all worked, and was actually pushing it further than we intended. So he was literally walking off across the room, kind of clipping through walls and all that kind of stuff because he understood the technology. He wanted to kind of push it and almost break it. Where there was other people who just didn't know how to interact. They couldn't get the headset right. They couldn't figure out the controllers. Um, so I think the controllers thing is really interesting. If you don't have a lot of skill and knowledge with that kind of thing, and you hand it off to your aunt or your grandma or something who hasn't tried VR before, how do they still get an experience out of that? Um, and is that something like with the interactive narrative stuff that I've done? Is that a timeout? So after a certain period of time, it already transitions you onto the next section, or is that additional UI telling you this is how you need to do it and kind of stepping you through that? There's loads of different considerations of how someone can have an experience and come away with something even if they didn't know how to interact with it. And for the punk project, that was the real challenge. We had a timeout, so after like 30 seconds or so, it moved on to the next bit of voiceover, the next bit of narrative. Because if you weren't doing those triggers, you just stand there for 10 minutes and kind of almost like Stanley's parable, you're kind of just waiting for the next bit of voiceover to come, and it doesn't, but you can wait there as long as you like. That's giving people
Yeah,
too much freedom almost. So
exactly.
and
User
then
testing is so important.
yeah, yeah, massively. And I'd never done that before, and it's, if you're going to produce anything and put it out to the public, understanding your audience and then being able to test with that audience is just so valuable. Getting feedback and just watching people play your game, you pick up on things that they don't pick up on in feedback. So being able to see that and experience that in the same room is really valuable. And beyond just friends and family, I think people who are totally disconnected from the technology or from yourselves and the development and the understanding of the project is really important as well.
Sometimes it's painful to watch sometimes too.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're just like, because if you're doing a good user test, you don't give them any input like verbally from, yourself. It's all
Yeah.
within the application. So it they're just standing there, and you're like sitting there silently, like just pick that thing up right
Yeah.
there. Just, it's right in front of you.
Yeah.
And they're just standing there and they don't know what to do, and like but it highlights, okay, here's a point where I need to add in some kind of audio cue or visual cue, or encourage them to this direction.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like a lot of, especially indie type developers who are working on their game, like they just work in this bubble and they never actually show their project to anyone or have anyone else try it besides maybe their friend who's also super into VR. And so, like, I have a coaching program for the people in my course. They can do coaching with me, and so I was testing one of my students' projects, and so we had both been testing it, and I'm like, okay, yeah, this is great. You can go around and you touch this and move these things around. But then she went and had some people from her target audience play it, and they were like trying to poke things that was supposed to be just a display element and not like actual an interactable element, and it kind of highlighted all these little areas of us two who were more experienced VR developers, weren't thinking about how people just coming into the technology would interact or try to, manipulate the world. And so, yeah, just having other people play it so you're getting out of your bubble is super important.
Absolutely. And then what cues you learn from that with. So um, like in fragments, I had outlines around the interactable objects, so they were highlighted and you could see if something was interactable. You move your controller near it and it changes color to indicate you can pick it up. And you look at kind of some of the other big VR games like the kind of your Bone Labs and Bonework, and they have these kind of little dots that appear and show that you can pick something up, and giving that narrative and that kind of language, sorry, to someone to understand how to interact with things or what they need to do, be that a controller introduction at the beginning of the game or mapping all of the buttons to do grab. Like if someone's gonna mash all the buttons,
Yep.
then make all the buttons do the same thing. Like all those kind of small things, and then how on if UI and like prompts play a part in it. Like are they something that in your narrative, do they appear straight away? Do they tell you what to do? Do they appear after a certain amount of time, or do you kind of go completely without them and try and use other cues to get people to interact? I think for the game jam specifically, we're obviously a community of VR developers, gamers, players. We understand the technology, so you can skip quite a few of those steps. You know, typically you're going to move with the joystick, you're going to grab with the inside button of the kind of Quest controllers. So those kind of interactions you can kind of skip over. But as soon as you go beyond our community, how do you tell people that it works in that way? Even then, like you say, down to how you actually pick up the controller, where your buttons, where your fingers sit over the buttons naturally. How does that work and feel, and how do you tell someone that? And again, I use the punk project because I learned so much on that. But rather than opting for kind of hands, we have the controllers similar to what I've done in Fragments. So you can see the one-to-one controller that you have in real life and in the virtual world. So you have that point of connection between the two. And when you pull down on the trigger moves in the game. And those kind of small ties help bridge that gap. But it's not all an answer. You need to kind of use a little bit of everything to understand where you need to take those things.
I do like having the controllers in game. And like one of my pet peeves is when the like the tutorial or whatever is like press A to do this, and I've been doing VR development for like 4 years and I don't know which button is the A button still.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
no, I agree.
and then I'll just mash all of them until one works. But then, if you have the controllers in game and it's like just press the bottom one, or here's the button where it is on the controller, that makes so much more sense to me.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think the really interesting space is then when you start to blend the controller into the like the lore and the narrative of your game, and rather than just having the controller there, it's actually does something more. I can't remember the name of the game, but there's one where you can see the bottom half of the controller, and then the top half is like kind of objects that you can. Do you know
Was
which one I'm
it
talking about?
red matter?
No, that wasn't the one I was thinking of, but I think I don't know. I can't remember.
Yeah, but like, yeah, it's like almost you're holding a tool, and the tool has the same buttons and the same layout
Yes.
that your controller does,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
so it translates in the storyline well. But then you also can just kind of glance down like you would normally if you were manipulating any other tool
Yeah.
and like find out where the button is.
And you feel
And
embedded in the world because of that.
mm-hmm.
It's not like you have this kind of weird hand, or you have your exact one-to-one controller. You have something that fits within that environment, but still feels natural to what's actually in your hands. I think that's a really kind of clever bridge, especially for people again that haven't spent a lot of time in VR. That kind of really helps them in and guides them through that
How much hand tracking stuff have you done? Have you dabbled around in that
a little
very
bit.
much?
Nothing kind of finished. Um, yeah, I've done a bit. I've always found that the Quest hand tracking doesn't really work with my hands for whatever reason. I don't know if that's just me or what, but yeah, I think it's really interesting how, especially with the Vision Pro, how you can not have controllers and what things you can tell with that. I guess there'll be a lot of kind of poke interactors and kind of pointing at things, but yeah, I've not done a lot of hand stuff.
The eye gazing is clutch. It's really nice being able to look wherever you want to, click or interact with, and then doing
Mm-hmm.
the little pinch gesture is like a superpower. It's so fast, and you don't have to like try to point with a laser, and it's like more difficult. Like just looking and clicking is super nice. So that's gonna be ideal, and like ultimately get into a bunch of different applications. But I mean, the Vision Pro and then the Quest Pro, which they've discontinued now,
Oh, really?
are really the only ones who have eye tracking at the
Yeah.
moment. They're like, there's a couple other like smaller headsets, but those are the two major ones. So unless a lot of apps aren't utilizing it yet, because it's like you just have to pay a ridiculous amount of money in order to get a headset that will do that, and the majority of their market, doesn't have those headsets. So
Mm-hmm. I really like the idea of eye tracking. I think it's a really obviously underutilized input for VR, and would love to see more of that. I've not well, like we've got a Quest Pro in the office, but I've not done a lot of development with it thus far. So I've not really got into the eye tracking side of things. But we in some of the video apps that we build just to kind of play back the videos, the really simple ones that clients will take off into kind of like a showcase and just hand around headsets and they can watch the video. We have just the kind of reticle dot in the middle of the screen, so you kind of move your head and click on things with that, and it's quite clunky because your whole kind of head is effectively the mouse at that point.
yeah.
So if you could just change that to just looking at certain buttons or whatever it is, I think that's a really kind of intuitive way of coming at it. But yeah, like you say, not many headsets have it.
Yeah, we'll get there. It'll become the standard eventually. I definitely think that's going to be ultimately the primary interaction, especially with a lot of the AR stuff coming around, and that's going to become more popular, especially with the Vision Pro. That's like really what they're focusing on is AR
Yeah.
applications. That kind of interaction is going to be super nice, being able to like look wherever you want to click. But yeah, the future is going to be cool. Like now that Apple's in the game,
Mm-hmm.
like a ton of people are starting to get into VR. And it's going to start driving a lot more games being made and a lot more applications coming out there. So the future is still bright.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's an interesting road. I'm intrigued to see where it goes.
Yep. Cool. Well, do you have any other questions or anything
I don't think
you'd like
so.
to mention?
I'd one thing I'd like to mention is one of my inspirations that kind of that I was using and looking at when I was making fragments is an experience called Book of Distance. I think it's free on Steam at the moment, or has been, and it's quite a few years old now. But it's again an interactive narrative. But I think the real kind of interesting thing about that is the touch points and the kind of emotions of the story that it tells you. So it's about um, there's a family that left Japan during the Second World War, and they then moved to I think it's Canada, and there's kind of small interactions that you have to do in part of the telling of this story, kind of loading a suitcase and picking up various different things. And the really interesting thing is then it reprises some of those interactions at the end when it starts to get more emotional and you start talking about kind of loss and family and things. And because you're in there doing these small interactions, you feel a lot more embedded in the story. You're not just passively watching something. You're kind of taking part in it in a very small way. And to then have those interactions then again at the end, I think is a really lovely kind of come back round to bed you back into it and to remind you that you're still part of this story. Um, yeah, I've played it through a few times now, and it's just really touching, and I think very subtle in its interaction and its narrative. But I would highly recommend anyone who's kind of interested in this narrative VR storytelling. I think that's a really good piece.
The Book of what?
The Book of Distance, I think it's called.
Distance. Okay. Very nice. I love when stories come back on themselves and it's like, okay, after you've experienced all of this story, we're gonna show you the same shot or do the same like scene one more time. And like now you can kind of see the difference.
Yeah.
And those are super cool. I love those. Okay. It's very nice. Where can people find out about you? Do you have any kind of social media and
So
stuff?
off the back of the jam, I've set myself up a kind of developer Instagram, which is
Nice.
jackoc_dev. So feel free to go and follow me over there. I'm going to kind of try and keep track of some of my kind of side project development things that I'm working on. Otherwise, it's just kind of LinkedIn. I am on YouTube, but I don't kind of post much, just little highlights of stuff I've been working on. But yeah, come and follow on
Nice.
Instagram. That's probably the main place.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll have fragments linked below if anyone wants to go play Jack's game. 1 second in the game jam, first in presentation, and then your Instagram. And
Amazing.
thanks for so much for coming on. This was really good. This was really insightful
Thanks for
from
having me.
the kind of design and narrative perspective of VR, which I think a lot of people don't really see.
Absolutely, yeah. It's definitely an interesting space.
Nice.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.